Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're painting a watercolor wreath, and I'll show you how I plan my composition in a very intuitive method. So grab your supplies and let's get started. So as always, I will wake up my palette with the little spritz of water. This just gets the paints nice and wet and ready to go. And my general go-to are round watercolor brushes. This is a size 8 and a size 10. Usually between these two is how I will start most paintings. I also have 2 jars of water, one for warm, one for cool. And then my Quiller palette. If you haven't seen how I set up this color set here, I will link that video. This is a custom palette I've been working on for a while, and I've been using it and just love it. Alright, so when you do a wreath, you can always freehand it like I do. I kind of like to keep things loose and not complicated, so I don't really do a pencil sketch. You are welcome to do one if you want to have a circle or a guide, and that helps you. Feel free to do that. I'm just going to eyeball mine in a rough circle, and I'm leaving spaces for different elements like leaves and branches or berries. When it comes to painting intuitively, it's very much about a slow process and building up. So I will start really simple with something like this, which is a little branch element, and then filling out my circle as I go with larger and heavier elements. And it's a really good way to sort of take a step back and look at your work overall before you go too far into any details. Once I have a rough idea of my circle and it's relatively circular in shape, I can go ahead and start with my first element, which is going to be a leaf. I'm using a light green and then keeping the ends a little bit pointed. It's a very simple shape. I do have a video all about leaves if you would like to follow that and go on a deeper dive into different leaf shapes. This one is just using the end of the brush, making little points at the end, and then filling it in with the paint. I will also do a little demonstration here where I can show you the leaves a little bit larger on this scrap paper. So when you mix up the edges the way that they close, you can change your overall leaf look. So I'm keeping them a little bit pointed. You can always round them, you can make them teardropped, you can do more oval-y shapes. It's up to you. But what I also like to do is when I'm putting in the paint is try to have an even flat wash, because if you get too much paint in one area, it'll dry a little funny and you'll get hard lines and edges. So before I let the whole thing dry, I will even out that paint and water ratio. You can always use a paper towel or a rag to soak up extra water and even out that layer. So you'll get a nice sheen on it if you look at it from the side, and not too much water pooling on any one end. And most of these shapes are pretty forgiving. While they're still wet, you can go in and adjust the edges and the shape slightly. Once it's dried, it's a lot harder to go in and make any edits. So go ahead and take your first element and put it all around your circle. I'm just going in and randomly putting them in, just eyeballing it, trying to keep the balance and doing a somewhat even distribution. I don't want it to be too even because then it won't look natural. Also, something to keep in mind is I'm keeping this layer really light. It's always easier to go light to dark, and so you can always go in and add extra layers and saturation and details on the next steps. All right, so I'm mixing up a purpley brownish color and adding in a little bit more texture throughout my wreath. This is just little dots, like little sprigs with tiny delicate little branches coming off each of the little dots. And if it's easier to use a smaller paintbrush for this type of an element, you can always go ahead and switch. I like to add in different textures. So one is a flat leaf, one is these little dots. You want to mix them up so you get a lot of visual interest. So not everything is the same shape or the same feeling. You'll see me turning around my paper and rotating it a lot. This is good for getting into different angles, especially if, say, you're right-handed or left-handed. It might be easier at a certain angle to put in all your elements. And also, you get a nice visual overall when you flip the paper upside down. So you can kind of tell if your composition is looking more even and balanced. Here's a close-up of those little sprig lines. You can see with the smaller brush, I'm getting more delicate marks, and the bigger brush was a little bit more clunky. So I really like add in the delicate wispy textures mixed in with the bigger elements. All right, back to my bigger brush, and now with a different color because this is a very cool palette. I'm adding in a little bit warmth. I wanted to go with a bit of an orange. It's a dirtier orange. It's not a bright, bright orange. And again, I'm evening out the shape so that the water and paint is not pooling up too much so that it dries evenly without any harsh edges and lines. This shape is a teardrop shape, so it's rounded on one end, and then where it's attaching to the branch, it's pointed and smaller. If you're new to color theory, I have a playlist all about getting started with color palettes and how to shift colors from warm to cool, how to neutralize colors. I will go ahead and link that if you haven't seen it already. It also comes with some free guides and templates to help you on your color palette journey. Remember, take lots of steps back, look at the overall picture, and you'll know where to place different elements depending on your balance. This isn't really super planned out, so that's why I call it intuitive painting. So now I'm going in and adding a bit of a bolder choice here. This is a red. It's still not a super bright orangey red. It's more of a cool red, but I felt like I needed some contrast. And I'm also changing up the visuals by adding a different shape. So it's more of a fern style of foliage. And you can go in and add in wherever you feel like you need a little more interest. Go in and add those. This process is all about being in the moment and in real time seeing where to place elements and how the artwork actually feels to you, really connecting with your visual choices in the moment. It's a fun way to practice your skills and get better at discerning with your eye on colors, textures, shapes, sizes. All of these different elements will add to the overall piece. All right, while that dries, I'm going in with my smaller brush and adding some details now. On those orange flat leaves, I'm adding a few texture lines. And again, you can add as little or as many as you want for your art. And feel free to mix it up. You don't have to do exactly what I do. If you like to follow along, it's more of a suggestion and a guide, and I'd really encourage you to explore your own creativity and try some different textures and styles. All right, and for the final touches, I'm looking at the overall piece and I feel like it's still a bit sparse. So I wanted to go in and add some branches. This is a grayish black. It's more of a neutral. You can add that in as well in the background. Sometimes it's good to put in some neutrals so that it grounds your work and the other elements can shine, the ones that have more color and texture. This is just a simple branch element and it's very angular, so it's a little bit different than some of the other ones. It's more sharp, how branches can kind of have these twigs that stick out. So I want to simulate that like you'd see it in nature. And then I'm going in and just filling in some of the white spaces to make the entire wreath a little bit more full. All right, and now that I'm looking at the entire thing, I really feel like I want to add one more element. This is really up to you. Sometimes things can just look done to you and you feel like, oh, I can stop here. This is a good place. But because I really wanted to add in one more element just to add some visual interest, I'm going to go ahead with a blue and put in some bigger berries, and then I think I'll be done. So you stop wherever you feel like your work is done. You can also continue going. It's one of the fun things about watercolor and doing anything that's nature-based is you can come up with so many different variations on the same style. Now I'm going in and putting in these little berries pretty loosely. I'm adding a little white space for a natural highlight and then changing up the number in the cluster. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. That's how you would see it in nature. So that's what I'm doing. Once the berries are in, you can go ahead and add in your stems. This is a darker, cool gray, blue, black. I don't have the exact color here, but it is in the video where I set up my palette, so I'll link that, like I said, and you can look up the exact colors that I'm using. Sometimes I like to not focus too much on the color names and really look at how it actually looks on my paper, what the colors look like next to each other, and let that be your guide to making color choices. The more you let yourself play and be really free and fearless when it comes to choices like this, your intuitive skills will build and grow. And then I'm adding a little bit of a darker spot right under the berries to give it that little shadow effect to show that they are round and there's a little bit of shading. It's not a realistic painting, so I'm keeping it loose, but that little touch, I feel like it adds a little depth. So there we go. I hope you had so much fun following along. And if you did paint along, let me know in the comments what parts you really enjoyed. What would you like to see next time? Your comments really do help me create better content for you. This was a really fun, light, loose painting just to warm up and practice some foliage. Remember to check the links below for even more tutorials and freebies and my other courses. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.